All right, so welcome everyone to another APTA League Summit Zoom call. For those I haven't met, my name is Amin Kaduri. I'm the CEO of the APTA, and I'm very excited for this call tonight, which is going to be led by Damian Johnston, who is an APTA board member who also helps run the Fairfield County Men's League, and he's also the chair of the APTA PTI Algo Committee. So I will turn it over to Damian.
All right, thanks, Amin. We'll just do a quick intro and description of why on the PTI, and then we'll jump into it. My name is Damian Johnston. I'm the chair of the PTI Algorithm Committee for the APTA. Whenever we have these PTI meetings, and since we only have a few dozen of us here now, this will be recorded. But I do like to point out why the PTI. And while we're not talking about how it works or that sort of thing, we're going to talk about its effectiveness, but I think it's a good reminder to consider why we have the PTI. And I think that it's meant to be primarily an objective, data-driven measure of on-court performance. Why would you want this? Because it's useful to facilitate and coordinate competitive play, meaning matches between people of similar performance. That's why it's great for things like PTI tournaments, for tournament draw management. How do you split things up? How do you target different levels of players so that everyone can enjoy tournament play, tournament seeding, league division management, captain roster management, things like league stacking violations. I think a lot of times when our players and our members look at PTI, they think about it from themselves as an individual point of view. And I like to tell people that PTI is not a measure of your ability. It's not a measure of your potential. It's a measure of your performance on the court during rated matches. Certainly, I don't think anyone on the PTI committee or anyone that's been involved in getting that spread out across leagues has suggested that the goal of going on the court is to improve your PTI. I think we all go out there to have fun, to learn, to compete, and to win. So I like to remind people PTI is a measure, not a goal. With that, I'll share my screen and we'll get into some introductions. I'm not going to read this to you guys, but what I will tell you is that the APTA PTI Algorithm Committee consists of representatives from many leagues, far more than are on today's panel. Largely, this population is very well credentialed, they're analytical, and they're even a bit skeptical. I think a lot of people came onto this committee because they wanted to learn more, wanted to poke holes in it. Most of those people we've embraced and brought on to our committee. Our committee is certainly not infected with groupthink. We have lots of debates and differing points of view are common in our discussions. But what I will say is that we all have in common is that we want to make sure that the PTI algorithm moves in a direction that most accurately captures performance and serves the needs of the APTA and its members. So tonight's panel includes a bunch of us that have a bit more time to dig deep into this stuff. I specifically want to thank Joel Woolman and Jake Koretsky, who have put in so much time and an immense amount of effort into not only looking at the algorithm, how it works theoretically, how it behaves statistically, what some of the practical aspects of how it works, how it impacts its ability. But also they've gone through all kinds of player data and league data and match data to really assess how well has it done for us so far, and what are the trends across different leagues. And so I'll jump to that. I will say that we did have some debates on how many digits we wanted to put our own PTIs in there. I like to personally identify as a 30 plus or minus 3, but I put in whatever my current one is. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joel and Jake.
So thanks, Damien. I'll pick it up. And I want to thank you for not posting my own PTI on that slide until today, because it allowed me to convince Jake to be my member guest partner next week in our club's tournament. And with a 7 PTI differential, he might not have otherwise accepted. So I appreciate you waiting for that big reveal. And I mean, I guess, and before we get into it, I guess, had he been aware of my PTI, and he probably does, given all the data analysis he does, I would have simply just said that I'm way better than my PTI suggests. But since he's, you know, a fellow PTI committee member, that wouldn't have flied. We all know that PTI doesn't lie, but we know that it's a model, and you know, no model is perfect, and you know that's sort of a reasonable segue into the purpose of tonight, which is to talk about what PTI assumes, how it does, and then what we as a committee are doing to try to make it better. So I'll do a quick little background slide, and then we'll really get into it. So PTI stands for Platform Tennis Index. It was developed by the APTA and Paddle Scores as a ranking tool for paddle players. So it's scaled from 0 to 80 generally. The highest ranked player is a -16, and the lower your score is numerically, the better your ranking is. It's a single unisex rating system that's intended to cover all players. So whether you're recreational, league, tournament, one size, you know, fits all, and it's a matter of where you are on that spectrum. In terms of how it's structured, it's based on an ELO rating framework, which sort of started off with chess way back when, but now ELO rating frameworks are being used all over the place. If you're familiar with 538, they rate a bunch of professional teams using an ELO framework. It's a very widely used methodology. In the case of PTI, there are some adjustments that are made to account for paddle. First of all, it adjusts ratings based upon the team performance. Even though individuals have their own PTIs, PTIs move when doubles matches are played, and it's the combined PTI that matters, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. It also, as opposed to chess, which started off as a binary, or I guess really tertiary sort of system where you either win, lose, or draw.
How's the music and how's the level?
So the tertiary system, it's in the case of paddle, there's a much wider range of game outcomes, and so PTI factors in the percentage of games won in addition to a pure outcome-based result. There are confidence factors that influence how ratings adjust, and they take into account things like how many games you've played as a measure for how reliable your starting rating is. And they also take into account things such as the type of match that's being played, whether it's a casual match, a league match, or a tournament match. In terms of how ratings are seeded, there are a few different ways. There can be default weights that are specified at a division or line or division line combination in a particular league, but they can also be assigned or overridden by a league PTI representative or tournament director. And speaking on behalf of the PTI committee, we are a group that monitors the algorithm performance and evaluates different types of refinements based upon our own thinking and areas we want to look into, as well as member suggestions. So we encourage, strongly encourage people to reach out with questions, thoughts, and we'd love to consider that as part of our analysis. And so with that, I'll hand it over to Jake to talk a little bit about how PTI compares to some of the other systems, rating systems out there.
Awesome, thank you, Joel. I just want to add as a little note to that, if any of you guys have any questions really at any point during this presentation, we touch on a lot of stuff and some of it might move a little quickly. So if you have a question about what's currently on a slide, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask that. That said, the first thing we did when we formed this committee was look at how PTI compares to some of the other more familiar rankings algorithms. I have it here compared to the USGA handicap, the UTR tennis rating, and then the traditional USTA league tennis rating. The two things I want to point out are firstly that golf handicap, which most people are familiar with who play paddle, is a best case scenario rating system. Your golf handicap is how well you can play on a beautiful, bright June morning with a Pro V1 that you don't lose, and 3 chip-ins that day. It's a measure of your peak performance. PTI is not. PTI is how you've performed, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon when you were upset. It's a rating of how you actually perform. So making that distinction is really key, and knowing that your PTI isn't a reflection of what you can do on a great day is really helpful to understanding and I guess accepting the PTI for what it is. Another thing I do want to point out is that PTI has a much wider range than any of these other rating systems. And for that reason, I think a lot of people tend to overvalue a single point of PTI. You have to remember a single point of PTI is more or less like 0.3 of a golf handicap. Or in other words, if you're a 4.0 player in tennis and you want to move up to a 4.5, that's almost 10 points of PTI. Certainly no 4.0 is going to get excluded from a game of 4.5s, especially if it's a casual match. But sometimes we do see a player whose PTI is, 30 might get told no to by a group of 25s because they see that 5-point gap and they think, oh, wow, 5 is a big number. It's sort of significant. And that brings me to one final point on the topic of comparing these systems, which is that in the PTI system, what matters is not absolute numbers, but difference in numbers. A 5 and a 10 have the same skill gap as a 55 and a 65. 55 and a 60, rather. Some people like to think that, 5 is half of 10, 10 is double 5, therefore their skill is somehow double half, and that relatively the 55 and the 60 are closer in skill. That's not the case. From the top of the ladder to the bottom, a gap of X points means a gap of X skill. It looks like we have a question here from Dr. D. What about 10 cap / paddle cap? I can't say I'm familiar with that rating system. Joel, Damien, do you know anything about that?
I don't.
I was going to let Amin go on it because he was closer to it.
Yeah, the idea for PTI basically came from the use of paddle cap originally. Paddle cap is essentially the same thing as UTR. It's the same ELO algorithm. The one big difference between the paddle cap rating system and the PTI rating system is the winning bonus. Otherwise, they're almost exactly the same thing.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions about how PTI compares to these other rating algorithms at a high level? Awesome. All right, Joel.
Sure. So, well, the purpose of this discussion isn't to get into the weeds of PTI. I think it's still illustrative to walk through just an example somewhat quickly, just to show the various things that are in play and address some of the points that we're going to talk about in subsequent slides. So, PTI in action. You have home team hosts away team. Home team consists of 2 players, one with a PTI of 30, the other PTI of 50, so a combined PTI of 80. The away team has a combined PTI of 73. As you know, we had mentioned earlier, and I'm sure most people on this call are aware, lower PTI is better. So the away team is considered the favorites going into this match with a 7-point PTI differential. And based upon that differential, before a point is played, the algorithm would expect a score of 0.66. The expected score is somewhere between 0 and 1. The larger the PTI differential, the closer to 1 the favorite's expected score will be. the match happens, and lo and behold, the underdogs come out victorious, winning 3-6, 6-2, 6-4. As a result of that, they had an actual score of 0.70. The away team has one minus that. The away team has an actual score of 0.30, which is computed as 2/3 times the percentage of games won plus 1/3 times the winning bonus, where if they win, they get a point. If they lose, they don't get any additional points. So in this case, 2/3 times 44% is the 0.3 that's shown. And then as a result, the difference between the actual score and the expected score of around 0.36 is multiplied by a factor just under 3 to get an adjustment of about 1 point that gets applied to all players. So the winning team, each player has their PTI improve or decrease by 1 point. The away team, their individual PTIs each increase by 1 point. Now, in this stylized example, it assumes all players have 100% confidence levels, and it's a league match. All of those, both of those would affect the factor, but this kind of illustrates the dynamics of how PTI works. Now, one thing I should just point out is that this expected score of 0.66 doesn't mean that the away team is expected to win 66% of the time, because this score is a combination of the probability of winning as well as the games won. So actually an expected score of 0.66 really is the result of an 80% chance of winning, with the expectation that they'll win around 60% of the games. But I should just pause now and see if anybody has any questions about just about this sort of basic setup here. Okay, seems good. So we can move on. So just to highlight then some of the assumptions, implications of what's going on as illustrated by that example and PTI generally. So the score that matters balances winning and winning emphatically. So while the expected score can be between 0 and 1, it's a continuous distribution there. The actual scores, you don't have that property, because if you win, you'll get your actual score will be somewhere between 0.625 and 1. And if you lose, you'll get 1 minus what the winner got. So your score will be between 0 and 0.375. That's because if you win, the fewest number of games you can win is roughly 44% or so. And so when you take 44% times 2/3 plus 1/3, you get that roughly 0.625 figure. PTI doesn't care if you win a set. The only things it cares about are, did you win or lose, and what percentage of the games did you win or lose? And unlike the chess or the binary kind of ELO frameworks, your PTI can can worsen even if you win, if you don't win convincingly enough. So there's the actual score that's computed, and it's compared to the expected score. If you are such a large favorite that your expected score is so high, if your actual score doesn't live up to that expected score, your PTI can still worsen. Now, one of the unfortunate things about having the score be a kind of combination of games won and whether you win or not is that expected score isn't necessarily an intuitive metric that one might think about as it relates to either probability of winning or the expected games won. But there are ways to translate that back and forth with certain assumptions, and it's just important to take it to be aware that when you see that expected score, it is a blend of a couple different things, and that's how it's being used. Another important assumption is that a team performs as the sum of its parts. There is no I in team. team that has PTIs of 20 plus 40 or 60 is going to be considered just as skilled as a team of 230 PTI players. It does not explicitly account. I think there's some. It does not explicitly account for large skew differences between teams, and it's really just that sum that matters, and we'll talk about that a little bit later on. And then finally, just something as it relates to the ELO assumptions that underlie it. The assumption is that all players have roughly the same rating deviation. In other words, how much their variability, the range of their variability, but there is uncertainty about what their initial rating is and how it's estimated to be. So the use of confidence ratings allows for matches early on in a player's history to impact the new player disproportionately to the existing players, so that their ratings can move a lot to try to get to their ultimate true rating quicker, whereas players with a lot of history aren't going to be as impacted as much, but while that adjustment process is going on. And so I'll hand it back to Jake to talk about just how well PTI does as a predictive rating system.
Yeah, thank you, Joel. So let's get into the meat and potatoes of the stats here. This is the question you're all dying to hear answered. How good is PTI? Now, I want to preface this by saying that in an ideal world, we have a book of skill for each player that had the accurate skill rating for every player who's ever played paddle. And we just compare that to our algorithm and we'd see how well our algorithm does. That book doesn't exist, and unless the god of paddle comes down and hands it to me, it never will. So what we use is predictive accuracy as a proxy. Predictive accuracy is just how often does the favorite team win a match. It's the closest thing we have to actually assessing the skill of these players against what we predict their skill to be. And the second thing I want you guys to notice is that all of our methods that we use, each one's represented by a line on this chart, is more or less within this like 70 to 75% range, not too much variation. And that's down to the inherent randomness of paddle. Each sport has a different level of inherent randomness. If you look at something like track and field sprinting, that's not a very random sport. If you know who the best sprinter is in a field of 10 people, you know who's going to win the race. If you look at something like poker, even if you know who the best poker player at a table is, you're almost never going to be able to predict accurately who wins that hand. So paddle is somewhere between those two. There's more skill involved in poker, but also more luck involved in sprinting. So you'll never get close to like 90% accuracy in paddle just because there's so much randomness involved, especially with regard to partner choice and the people you play. If you could go to the next slide, yeah, great. So this looks at a breakdown of all the different methods we tested and studied. You'll see the outlier here is a Harvard study from 2017 that used point level data from the ATP Tour. Unfortunately, we don't.
Maddie, I'm just listening to something.
We don't have that level of data, so I think it's unlikely that we're ever able to reach that amount of accuracy. But compared to two other academic studies, one from Stanford and one from Swiss Federal Polytech, our prediction methods are about as good as it gets for racket and ball sports. You'll see we've tested 4 of them. Those are indicated by the solid lines. One is a win-loss ELO, which only looks at whether you've won or you've lost. The second is true skill, which is a pretty complex mathematical algorithm that also only looks at whether you've won or lost. We then have game ELO, which doesn't look at whether you've won or lost at all, just the proportion of games you win. And then we have good old PTI, which is a mix between your win bonus, 33%, and your games won, which is 66%. And those are all within more or less 2% of each other. So we're pushing right at the limit of what you can predict in a sport as random as paddle. As for predictive accuracy by league, the first thing you might notice is that these percentages are almost all higher than our theoretical maximums. That's because the previous slide, the algorithms knew nothing to start. They couldn't tell the difference between me and Roger Federer, and they had to figure that all out. when we see these leagues based on your divisional start, where you start in a division or what your pro rates you at, we're able to improve the accuracy, especially in the early few seasons. So you'll see that most of these leagues are kind of hovering around 73.5%. There's some that are better, some that are worse. We've been doing a lot of research into figuring out why some leagues are more accurate than others. We think this is down to how accurately they were seeded. So some leagues were seeded all via computer. Some had a lot of human intervention, a lot of pros going back and saying, hey, this guy shouldn't be at 35, he should be at 20. And then we also looked at the distributions of leagues, whether they fit this hypothetical normal distribution. A big enough league should be a bell curve. And if a league isn't a bell curve to start, it can have negative impacts on its accuracy. So if your league has good accuracy, it means you're more or less accurate to start. Any questions on that?
I have a question. I'm in the process of looking at some of the outliers that have been identified within the MIPL and plan to adjust those in the next week or so prior to the start of season. Would it be possible to use that as a point and relook at the MIPL after the fact?
Yeah, for sure. If it's only a handful of players, it might not make a huge difference, but we could definitely get you a revised accuracy number after you revise the start ratings.
Great, thank you.
I have a question. You mentioned normal distribution. We're from Long Island. We're not even close. We're towards the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and we have 1,100 guys. So,
yeah, one of our big assumptions, and that we're hopefully trying to put into this model, is that every league that's big enough more or less looks the same in terms of its mean and its distribution. By mean, I mean that Joe Schmo from that league is going to be the same as Joe Schmo from any other league. There's nothing in the water in Chicago that says their average, that makes their average paddle player better than a paddle player from Long Island. Perhaps their pros might be better because they have 6 times as many players. But to us, one of our core assumptions is that in these leagues of hundreds or thousands of players, your average player will be more or less the same. Your good players will be more or less the same distance from the average ones, and your bad players likewise.
I had another quick question. On the slide before this, you were showing not just PTI, but game ELO. So is game ELO what the prediction method would be if there wasn't the win-loss 1/3 kicker?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so because I was very curious how much that was throwing off the accuracy of PTI. It looks like it's not very much.
No, it's it actually is a little better overall, but you lose this kind of correlation between winning a match and your PTI going up. The end goal of paddle, after all, is to win matches, not win games. So we felt by using only game totals to adjust these PTIs, it wouldn't be to players, to league members, an accurate reflection of how they were doing.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Any other questions? All right, so I think we were just touching on this, but league ratings are set differently in each league. Each league has their own table of divisional star rating. If you're D1 line 3 in a certain league, you might not start at the same PTI as if you were in a different league. And this leads to leagues whose distributions are shaped differently, who's centered over different means. And I think that's one of the primary things we've at least preliminarily identified as a driver of inaccuracy between leagues. The second thing that we're looking at is confidence factors. Obviously, there's nothing in paddle that says your first 8 matches are the end all be all to adjusting your confidence. There's some people who take some time before they figure out where they really stack up against others. Other people are just at it from match 1. So finding a level of confidence and a system for moving that confidence, perhaps dynamically in response to what a player does, is one of our next priorities. As for how that would look like implemented, let's say you're a player and you play at about a 50 level, and you've been playing like that for say 12 matches. And suddenly in your 13th match, something just clicks and you start playing out of your mind, somewhere closer to the 30 level. As it currently stands, your league administrator has to go in and say, hey, this guy is on a complete tear. We should reduce his confidence so he's able to move up and down without affecting the order too much. In an ideal world, the system would recognize that. It would say, hey, he's performing way outside of what we think he should be playing at. Let's up his confidence interval, his personal standard deviation. And the system will allow him to move without any league administrator intervening. Any questions about that?
I have a question about confidence factor. I've heard some things, particularly, and I think I'm struggling because I have a league with a lot of new players. I have a league with people who take several years off and come back, or out for a prolonged injury and come back. And I'm struggling with, kind of the parameters of when do you do a confidence factor reset. Obviously they have one if they're a brand new player. But then is it only one reset of confidence factor? Like if it's a particular player and you reset their confidence factor, like back to zero, because like they're just getting it really quickly and you need them to catch up faster. Is that typically a one-time thing? If you adjust somebody's confidence factor?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can only adjust, currently you can only adjust someone's confidence factor once.
Okay.
And so typically you only want to reset someone's confidence factor when you're confident that their rating is probably close to 10 points off. And for whatever the reason, an injury, been away for the game for 3 or 4 years. So those would be typical reasons why, or someone all of a sudden really, a new tennis player or pro or college tennis player all of a sudden plays a tournament and then it clicks for them and they're no longer playing like a 30, they're playing like a 15. Those would be really so when you're fairly certain from results that you're seeing that the person's rating is materially off, and you don't want to cause wreak havoc on their opponent's PTIs, waiting for it to get to equilibrium, that's when you would want to do it.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have a quick follow-up question too, because I have these scenarios going on. Just hypothetically speaking, you have a team that has pulled up a lower division to fill, like a team folds. Let's say they pull a mostly D7 team up into D5. So a lot of the players really aren't D5 level players, and they all have existing PTIs that are around D7 level, right? Then you add a couple newer players to the game, and the actual default ratings for brand new players are better than the current seasoned players. And one of the questions is, even though they're brand new and it is a new rate, they have a zero confidence factor, do we know how many matches it actually, there could be a good 10 to 15 point spread in a real strange situation like that. And then the question is, well, how long is it going to take for them to get to where they should be? Is that maybe a season's worth? These are the real strange anomalies I'm struggling with.
Yeah, no, that's good. It's good real world question. I would say a couple of things. If you have that sort of situation, and that the players that are coming in that are new are right around the same skill level as everyone else on the team, you can go, you as a commissionered league can go in and manually adjust their start ratings to be consistent with everyone else on their team. You don't need to wait for that to play out over time. So,
okay.
And we definitely encourage that. If you have a pro or a team captain or anyone who has better information than what the default start rating is going to give you, absolutely use it. Because
okay, so you would encourage that, like using a pro that someone says, hey, they're not a 60, they're really a 75. Let's start them at 75. would be a better way to go. Okay.
Because it could take a full season
Yeah.
if you tried to let that adjust out naturally. And so that's just not worth doing to the person's partner. And it's, you're giving too much credit to the opponent. So yeah, it's better to get the most accurate information that you have in there if you have it.
Okay.
And those players are likely to be the people you notice at the end of the season made the biggest moves from their initial start rating. And they would be the ones that you would, through that process, end up modifying, like Paul's, kind of looking at in his league.
Yeah, question on that, moving the start rating versus change to the confidence factor. The situation you mentioned before, you start them as a 30, and then they kick in and play and really playing at a 15 after a while. You mean because they were a rackets professional beforehand or experienced player, but you got to start them somewhere. That's the hardest part in all of this, is figure out the start rating. It's actually the most critical piece in all of this, unless you change it. What are your thoughts? When would you do one versus the other?
So the nice thing about changing either the start rating or the confidence factor is it goes back and retroactively changes things. So you don't have to get it right away. You have the luxury of time, right? Because if you go back and change someone's start rating halfway through the season, it will go back and recalculate every match from the start of the season. So typically, I would change someone's start rating and recommend that people change, the PTI committees change start ratings when it's pretty clear from their match data and the graph that you can see that the start rating was wrong just from the start. And they were outperforming or underperforming right away. And it's usually pretty obvious. When you would rather change a confidence factor versus a start rating is that person's actually playing to their initial start rating for quite a while. But then all of a sudden you see a change a consistent change in the chart, either deteriorating or getting better. You wouldn't want to change the start rating if they've played 20 or 30 matches at their initial start rating. It looked pretty good.
On your phone? Why are you doing it on the computer?
Because you're watching.
Damien, can you just mute?
Got him.
Thank you. So that's when you would rather change the confidence factor when they have a decent amount of match history that looks pretty accurate already. You don't want to change a start rating if they were playing close to it, but that's when you would want to change a confidence factor when all of a sudden their rating looks off, like I mentioned in Aaron's question, when it looks off by 10 or 15 points for whatever reason, and there are lots of different reasons that can happen. That's when you would rather change a confidence factor.
Thank you.
And to that point, I would say, Amin, myself, and others, anytime that you're in one of those situations and you want to just talk about it with someone else, we're all happy to participate in those conversations. You don't have to be alone as a league administrator. It's one of the benefits of being all in this together. Cool.
Great. Joel, do you want to take on
Yeah,
skew?
Yep. So I'll take the last two. So scoring, alluded to before. Right now, it displays on paddle scores the expected score and the actual score. To the extent that people want to see more metrics around probability of wins or expected game scores, that's kind of an open dialogue right now. Some people have asked for it, others not necessarily as relevant as the ultimate PTI movements, but that's something we're looking into. Sort of related to the scoring, people have brought up, well, should sets count as a scoring criteria? We've looked at it, from a mathematical perspective. There really isn't an obvious way to incorporate sets, and games captures it but there's a sentiment that sets should count. We're open to people's views on making an argument for counting it. We haven't yet really received a I don't want to say persuasive enough, but an implementable way to address it. So that's still kind of on the shelf. And then finally, with respect to team skew, as I was talking about before, the situation where you have a team with a large gap in PTIs. On one team, there could be a large gap of PTIs, and on another team, the PTIs might be considerably closer. And there have been arguments on both sides of whether skew is beneficial or not to the outcome. We've looked at it, and we haven't found it to be a meaningful factor so far, and we looked at it over a range of different skews and at different PTI levels. But again, we welcome any experience that anyone has on particular cases, and we can look into that. But we're continuing to monitor whether there's something to do with respect to incorporating that or how to count such matches, et cetera. But so far, while it's definitely come up as a topic, we haven't seen it play out in the data as a meaningful factor.
Joel, just in case that wasn't clear to people, so I think what Joel's saying here is a 30 and a 50 versus two 40s. A lot of people would think, well, the two 40s would win that match easy every time because they can pick on the 50, but the data has not borne that out. That's pretty much what you're saying, Joel?
Yeah, and if anything, actually, the data so far has sort of shown that the 50 and the 30 might actually might have an advantage, small, if anything. If anything, the data very preliminarily has shown skew kind of working in your favor, but it's very slight, and we're continuing to look into it.
Right, thank you.
And I think that more or less concludes the prepared slides. We're happy to open it up generally, and if anyone has any questions or thoughts.
Hey man, this is Larry. I got one. We had talked about the spread of 20 and it doesn't count. And you had mentioned possibly if the lower team does better, maybe that would count in the future.
Oh, as far as
yeah, PTI.
In fact, if the underdog team wins, it still does. It does. If it
doesn't win, which it never does, I mean, in our lives, and they lose 7-6, 7-6, there's no credit then for any player.
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. There was talk maybe to give those guys a little push up or something. All right, no big deal.
Yeah. I think that the logic behind that one, Larry, is that in a place where a match is predicted to be so lopsided, and that 21 point lives in this kind of mathematical realm where it is so highly unlikely that it's almost not an option. So we didn't want to have an algorithm that incented a team so favored that they have to emphatically win, to use Joel's words, and beat up that other team. Otherwise, they get punished for it.
The guys put up a great fight, and they get a little upset that they don't get any credit. That's all.
Yeah, no, that's true. Yeah, the other side of that one turns out to be the pro that is playing down in Series 11 in Chicago, and their job isn't to win the match, but it's to keep the point in play and let their partner either win or decide the match.
Okay.
And so you make a valid point. It very well could be the case that it was, underdogs going, or it could have been someone playing easy and trying to figure out how to be a gentleman or a lady on the court.
So Dave, I got a question. Most of this is set up, it seems like, for leagues that play 2 out of 3 sets. Those that do, play one set and rotate, through partners and change constantly, have a lot more matches, and then, they get more, I would think they get more of a premium for winning, because you're winning 3 matches a night instead of 1.
Yeah.
How does that affect the PTI, on either side, or does it?
My
And
guess
should
is,
there be a different weighting, for winning?
yeah, no, I think so. That's a great question. We, to Jake's research on whether games won as a scoring mechanism versus win-loss, that we certainly see game percentage having better predictive accuracy. But I would think that the algorithm, and I'll ask Joel or Jake to kind of speak to this as well, more observations is generally speaking better for the math. That allows there to be more movement and more adjustment towards what your asymptotic rating is, what you like, where you really should be. And so when you win and then lose, win and then lose, it's constantly adjusting you around some value. And I think I would think that actually would have you be more accurate, Bruce.
Right.
Jake, Joel, do you want to comment on that?
Well, you're running through your confidence factors in 8 sets instead of 24 sets.
That's true. But what I will say is the confidence factors really are about the initial setting.
Right.
Over the period of time, having more observations, 3 times more observations for the number of nights you're playing may be better, especially with a variety of partners.
Okay.
Yeah, to that point, I think you guys saw on this slide, there's about a 1.5–2% difference in predictive accuracy between just using games and just using win-loss. So as you said, win-loss matters more when you're playing each set as a match. So I would imagine there's maybe a couple tenths of a percent inaccuracy introduced by that. But to what Damien said, there's such a variety of partners and you get way more points of data using this method. I wouldn't be surprised if it's actually helping accuracy.
Yeah, I was going to weigh in and say the same thing, that from an expectation perspective, the expectations in terms of percent games won and the percentage of games and the times that you will win or lose will in expectation work out to be the same regardless of how you do that. But the diversity of partners, I think, will trump the fact that you're giving up a little bit, as Jake points out. And the fact is, most of it is being able to partner with different people and play different opponents will cause you be able to ferret out the distinctions between partners that often play together a lot.
All right.
Well, since there's a silence, we'll throw out there that certainly you guys have email addresses for most of us, or one step away from getting our email addresses. Please feel free to send us questions, anecdotes, and so forth. We obviously can't fix everything, and as you all know, being the people most interested in it, the start ratings and the confidence factors are the only dials, and then it's a matter of play and encouraging people to play and to focus on the fun part of the game is, I think, the most productive thing to do, and that let PTI be that measure. We all came at this stuff, and a lot of the research, especially that Jake and Joel have done, really came at with a skeptical eye, and the number of emails and texts and so forth about this stuff with that skepticism is there. And despite the skepticism and thoughts that we could simply improve things, we have not yet found those simple answers that improve things. We have a pretty damn good system here that has both mathematically proven itself, but empirically in a lot of the leagues that have been using it for several seasons.
I just have a question. Is there an inaccuracy just inherent in the fact if you have somebody who's a very good player, but say their club only has a team in like one of your lower divisions and they play, but they haven't done tournaments or anything yet, so they get a start rating of I don't know, a 60 or something, but yet they are a very good player. But, you know, maybe they're at a club without a pro, or even so, how would you know where to put that person? Like, is it, you know, then if they do a tournament, they're going to be so misplaced in a way. I mean, is there any way to do something with that if those cases come up?
I think that's a good question. I'm trying to wrap my head around some of the implications of it, Leila.
Like
Especially if they don't have a strong partner,
right,
or they don't have strong opponents, right? So in the mantra of it's not a measure of your ability, it's a measure of your on-court performance. If you haven't had the opportunity to demonstrate
right,
in a rated match how strong you are, then it's hard for you to achieve a lower rating. Right? If you constantly are beating up on 45s, it's going to be hard to get your rating into the 20s.
right.
That's yeah, that's something you can see in a lot of people's histories. When you pull up someone who you think might be misrated, you might look at it and you see their graph kind of flatline. They stayed consistent at 60 for 20 matches. But if you look at it, they won all 20 matches, yet they never improved because they were expected to win all those matches so big. And it was only when they actually started playing competition at their level that they improved. That's where you would then go back and probably change that person's start rating. It won't impact any of the other three people on the courts because nobody moved anyway, because it was already so lopsided. So it's, again, the sooner you know that information, the better it is to put it in there. But it's not the end of the world if you don't have it until later, because again, it will go, you can go back and correct it. But that we've seen that case quite a bit.
Okay, I just wasn't sure, because every once in a while that happens and it's at a club that doesn't have a higher team. You don't know they're so good until they start doing tournaments or something. So, and then one other question. We had a team last year because of COVID. It was a new team. We just plopped them into Division 7, but now they're going back to where they should have been, which is down in Division 11. So would that be a whole team? Like now they're going to have had a start rating is where our Division 7 is, but now they're going back to Division 11. So should all of their ratings be changed or something? Or we can talk about this separately if it's, but.
Well, I mean, I'll just give a quick answer and we can talk about it in more detail. But when they were in a division they didn't belong in, my guess is they were getting.
They were all new. They were all brand new players. They'd never played in the league before. We put them in there just because of COVID. We had an opening. Right.
And so you have some history to see how they held up. Probably the ratings all got worse somewhat quickly because their confidence rating was low. You know, now you'll have some more data in their new Division 11, and you may want to go back and change their start ratings. But we can take a look at those specifically.
Okay, I'll email you separately then.
Yeah, and for anyone on the call and for anyone listening to this recording, our PTI algorithm call, as Damien said, is more than happy to help PTI committees for any league around the country look at these outlier cases, because they happen in every league for many different reasons. And our committee has definitely seen not every scenario, because there are new ones that come up all the time, but a lot of them. And so we want to help, because the more accurate everyone's league is and the system, just the entire system becomes that much more robust. So we want to help, and we were happy to weigh in on this stuff.
This is Larry. I got a question. Has anybody ever pulled the trigger and told people to move from division to division at this meeting? Because I have a situation where I'm ready to do it.
Like a whole team or a player?
Just a couple guys. There's no way they belong where they do. And why they got there's another story. So I'm analyzing it and looking at it, and it looks like they're way out of line.
Do you find like you have players that are too strong playing in a low division and in a weaker division?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Has
And
anybody run
does
into
their
that
club
and done
have
anything about
teams
it?
in the upper division?
I'll send you the example, but
Okay.
there's two players in the 4 division that would be number 6 and 7 in the 2 division.
So Larry, my league has done something about it once. We have a very weak team with one really strong player in it playing in a very weak division, and everyone in that division hated playing this one person.
Correct.
And so the league board made a rule that no one with a PTI below a certain number was allowed to play in that division. So that was the one, and this was like a 20 playing against 40s and 50s. And so, you know, boards can look at specific examples like that and just, you know, again, you're trying to put the appropriate people on the court together. Now, the poor guy, this is the only team he can play on because it's the only team his club has. So it's a tricky one, but, you know, I think it's looking at it on a case-by-case basis and what makes most sense. We're happy to follow up with you offline, Larry.
Good. Thank you.
I know sometime in one of the earlier calls we've had over the summer or something, we talked about maybe having a different flexibility or weighting. So we have the 1 for league matches, a half for casual, and then 1.5 for tournaments for certain of the matches. Is it available, you know, have 0.75 or some other for other tournaments, you know, intra, you know, club tournaments or something, you know, or not?
So the answer to that is yes, it is possible to do. And there are some leagues that play 10-game pro sets or 8-game pro sets or box leagues where, yeah, you're playing with 3 different partners. And there are leagues that have requested, I want those just to count 75%, or, you know, for our spring league, when it's a box league, we make them count 2/3. So you can, for, you know, we don't like to do it for individual matches, or even necessarily for individual tournaments, though on occasion we have, but yes, it is customizable. But, you know, we'd rather have those be exceptions than rules. But the broader the data set, then the more likely we'd want to do it.
Okay.
Yeah, my suspicion, I mean, is that customizability, given the research I've done replicating the algorithm,
yeah,
is one of those things that paddle scores literally hard codes into the math,
right.
And it's something to avoid if possible, but it's possible if necessary.
Yeah, I just wanted to say before we lose everybody, I very much appreciate what Damien, Joel, and Jake have done. Damien has essentially, you know, recreated and rebuilt the entire algorithm and database of all matches played. And Joel and Jake have analyzed that data umpteen thousand ways, and they're really turning up some really useful stuff. The league, the Baltimore Men's League, came to us and said, we think our players are overrated. And, you know, Jake and Joel confirmed that, and we adjusted their entire league so that we fixed a whole league skew issue. And there are a couple other leagues where we've approached a couple leagues and said, we think you have a league skew issue. Would you like your league to be adjusted? And the answer from the first one was yes, but not till the end of the season, because I don't want my players freaking out now. So these guys have done a tremendous amount. I don't have the brain or the analytical power to keep up with what they've done, but I just want everyone on this call and anyone watching the recording to know, like, there is a lot of rigorous thought and analysis being put in by some very smart people on all this. And thank you for those guys who are doing it because they love this stuff.
So, Damien, I have a question.
Sure.
With respect to that answer that Amin just gave about Baltimore, how do you take a look at a league where no one played somebody from New York, for example?
Yeah.
When there's no intermixing of the leagues and get a rating?
One of the things that Jake really was the one to dial in on, and it's sort of obvious, and it's what he was saying early on, is that, you know, some simple statistics like average and standard deviation can, for sufficiently sized populations, indicate where there might be somewhere where there's a skew. What we haven't done directly yet is to look for the few matches that happen between regions or those populations. I think that would be an interesting place to go next. Is there aren't many of them, but you could theoretically use those to adjust in a fractional way a whole region, as if those interleague matches were matches between the leagues themselves. At least a hypothesis. I did do a quick little thing this morning. Go ahead.
That'd be fascinating. fascinating information. One thing, but going way back, this is how long ago now? 25 years. The concept of, is the Denver League better than the Minneapolis League, was always a question, and how do we fit that together?
Yeah.
And there was always great arguments about that over the time period.
Yeah, we've
So,
had some. Yeah.
yeah, it's very fun.
I bet you we can repeat those. I did actually look at today a subset of the full match history data. And I'm pretty sure that even though I've only got matches in the system back to 2016, that there are at least 100,000 matches that my PTI depends on in some way or another. If you think back from the last match I played with Jake to the people we played against and who they played against and who they played against, and as you spread that all out, it goes back at least 100,000 matches. We're all very intertwined, even if just partially. I would say the majority of my PTI comes from my last 20 matches. Cool. Well, I mean, I think you can probably stop the recording and the people can get real.
I just wanted to mention that at the MIPL, we just introduced PTI Ambassador Committee, and it's a committee of pretty much all the clubs represented. And I held a Zoom meeting with them after asking them to watch the great video that's out on the web already about PTI calculations. And we walked through some examples, and I told them, you know, these are the kinds of tools that I have, and asked them to send back lists of anybody that they think might have the wrong PTI. And so I've gotten some recommendations coming back, and I'll certainly look at all those. But yeah, it's Terry Gallagher's, thank you. I'll look at them all, but I've already had feedback. This Zoom meeting was about a week or two ago, and I've already had feedback saying, you know, we don't have anybody to suggest, but, you know, it's good to have this conversation about it. And so we're getting better acceptance of PTI just on the fact that we're discussing it.
Thank you, Paul. Yeah. Damien, should we?
I was going to let you wrap it up. I mean, all right. Well, thank you everyone for signing in. I totally agree, Paul. Also, that Amin and I had the opportunity to speak to the Fairfield County Women's League, answer some questions there. It was a bit of a hot seat, but not too bad. I think they were nicer to us than they were to Leela and Tiernan.
Yes.
And such things are things that, again, that we would be happy to do, you know, schedule with you if you need be. And this recording of this video hopefully will be another resource that we can use for people that, you know, oh, this math doesn't work. Well, we thought the same thing, and it does.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Damien and the PTI Algorithm Committee, and thanks to everyone for taking some time out of your night. And we'll keep working on this, and we'll keep iterating and improving, and we'll keep coming back and reporting back to all of you.
Good
Thanks,
stuff.
everybody.
Thanks, you guys.
Thanks, guys.
Have a